Thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us about your near-death experience and how it changed your perspective on life and spirituality? Of course. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll start by saying that I stepped into the afterlife an atheist and returned a believer. I'm here to tell you that the near-death experience, or NDE, is very, very real. That's a powerful statement. Can you elaborate on that? Certainly. I wouldn't say that God doesn't exist, but I would say that he is something different than the way religion typically describes it. My experience opened my eyes to a reality beyond what I had previously believed. Let's start from the beginning. Can you tell us a bit about your background before the NDE? Sure. I have to say that my childhood was not a particularly happy one. There was a lot of trauma in my home, a lot of fighting, and just things that I did not want to be subject to if I could avoid it. I'm sorry to hear that. How old were you when the NDE occurred? I was 20 years old. I was still living at home with my parents, and my bedroom was located on the second floor, right above the kitchen. Can you walk us through what happened that night? In the kitchen, we had a gas stove. There was a gas leak from the stove, and the gas was rising from the kitchen into my bedroom. So while I was sleeping all night long, I was breathing in this gas. That sounds terrifying. What happened when you woke up? When I tried to get myself out of bed, I noticed I could not move a good portion of my body. My legs were so heavy that I couldn't move them, and my head was so heavy I couldn't get it off the pillow. By the second or third attempt, I knew if I didn't get out of this bed, I was going to die. How did you manage to get help? I managed to pull myself to the very edge of the bed, and I tumbled out of the bed and hit the floor face first. That must have been painful. Here's what's very, very interesting about this. The second I hit the floor, I knew I hit it, but I felt no pain at all. I thought this was strange, but the reason was that my body was dead, and I was no longer in that body. Wait, you were aware of this? Yes, I was floating above it, in a neutral corner of the room, looking down on my lifeless body. This didn't frighten me right away. In fact, it didn't frighten me at all. It felt euphoric, it felt like relief, it felt amazing actually. That's fascinating. Can you describe what you were experiencing? The colors were more vivid, everything I was seeing was just more vibrant and alive, even though I was looking at my dead body. There was a light that came from the adjacent corner of the room. This was a huge white, cone-shaped light, like a spotlight, that was shining only on me, not my dead body, my living energy that was floating above it. Did you approach the light? As I proceeded to go into the light, I was apprehensive. There was a being at the end of the light. I can't tell you who it was, I don't know if it was male or female, but the being said, "It's okay. You can come into the light. It's okay." How did that make you feel? I felt comfortable, and I proceeded to go in further into the light. The further I got, the more the euphoria increased. The feelings, I just wish there was a word that could summarize it, but euphoric is the best word I can possibly think of. It was the most amazing feeling I've ever felt in my entire life. It sounds like an incredible experience. What happened next? Needless to say, I wanted to continue into the light to the other side, but in that moment, I was looking down at myself, and my father had come running into the room. This is when he finds me, and he scoops me up, and he's distraught, and he's crying, and he's holding me, and he's screaming for the paramedics to come. That must have been difficult to watch. It was. He and I really didn't have a great relationship, to say the least. In fact, I don't even remember how many times he hugged me, but maybe less than 5, and one of them was when I was dead. So I wanted that relationship with my father, I wanted it to be that way. Is that what made you decide to come back? Yes, I thought if I went back, that it would be, and I kind of started to ask the being if I could go back. I was asking by saying, I can't leave him that way. It was almost like I was negotiating to go back. What happened when you returned to your body? The next thing I know, when I wake up, I am back in my body. I'm not in that room anymore. I'm on the living room floor, and the paramedics are now working on me diligently with all their tools and their equipment. They're talking to one another, and they're like, "We have to get the truck, we have to get the truck." They're talking about the ambulance. How did you feel at that moment? I felt great, and I'm like, "Guys, listen, I feel fantastic. I've never felt better. Don't worry about me, I'm good." And they're like, "You're not good. You don't realize it, but you are not good, and you have to come to the hospital." And I'm like, "But did you see the light? Did you hear the voice? Wasn't that awesome?" And now they're looking at me like I'm crazy or insane. That must have been frustrating, to have had such an incredible experience and not be able to share it. It was. But that's when I realized, I stepped into the afterlife an atheist, and I returned a believer. How did this experience change your life moving forward? Well, initially, not in a positive way. I continued to live my life in a manner that was very self-destructive because here I am, I'm 20 years old, and I don't fear death. So I proceeded to put myself into some very precarious situations where I could die. Can you give us an example? I worked for criminals, and I was in an environment where people would shoot at each other. I remember one instance where I was hiding under the bar of this place, and the being tells me how to get out of the bar. The same being from your NDE? Yes, it felt like the same presence. It says, side door, side door, side door, and I said, no, I can't go out the side door because the shooter's going to see me. And he says, side door, side door, side door. So I said, what have I got to lose? Did you follow the being's advice? I did. I go to the side door, I manage to get out, and then there's another long corridor I have to run down and go out another side door, and that leads me to my car. I never ever parked in that spot with the exception of that day. I don't know what made me park on that side of the building. Normally, I would have parked all the way on the other side and probably not have made it. That's incredible. Did you have any other experiences like this? Yes, this happens very often throughout my life. That's not just one occasion. I can recall another instance where I was younger, and I was swimming in the ocean, and I got pulled out to sea by the undertow. That sounds terrifying. What happened? I was very, very far out, and I was trying to swim back in, but I couldn't. I would try to swim, and the undertow would keep pushing me back. The lifeguard isn't looking at me, he's facing the other way. I'm trying to get anyone's attention because I think I'm going to drown. In fact, I know I am, and no one's looking at me. How did you survive? Here's the being saying, calm down, swim sideways, and take as long as you need to get to shore. And that's what I did. Now, I would never have known to do this. Again, I'm very young, and I swam on an angle and I made it to shore. It took me a very long time, but I was very calm. It seems like this being has been looking out for you throughout your life. Exactly. That's when I had to start coming to terms with the fact that there is something else. What it is, I don't really know just yet, until I get all the way to meeting my second wife. But I do know that there is more to life after life. How has your understanding of spirituality and religion changed since your NDE? Those that are very religious, when they have an NDE, they sort of see it in the way that they were taught, what is supposed to be this and what is supposed to be that according to religion. And listen, they may be right, you know. But what I see from the combination of science and the NDE, having a different perspective, I look for things outside the box now. So how do you view God now? I wouldn't say that God doesn't exist, but I would say that he is something different than the way religion is describing it. I would say that God is more of a collective consciousness, like Carl Jung described it, and that we are all connected to that entity. That's an interesting perspective. Can you elaborate on that? Even Jesus, who I believe walked the earth and was an amazing human being, told us, God is within you, and you are a part of God. So what he's saying is that exact fact, that we are a part of that entity, and that entity is a part of us. How does this differ from traditional religious teachings? What Jesus never ever said was that he was the only Son of God. In fact, he said we were all sons of God. So if we're all a part of the entity, then we and the entity, if you wish to call it God or the universe or the collective, choose your word, we're all a part of it. And if we're all a part of it, we're all equal. That's a very egalitarian view of spirituality. Exactly. There isn't one person that's above another person. We're all connected to that energetic entity, and we're all creators of the universe collectively. That just makes more sense to me than one singular higher power making decisions on behalf of everyone. If that's the case, why do you think there's still so much suffering in the world? Because if that were the case, we could do away with a lot of the terrible things that are happening. The reason we don't is because we're collective consciousness, and some people are bad people, and they are a part of that collective consciousness. Until more people are good and less are bad, and the balance, the tipping point, starts to go the other way, that entity doesn't know which way to go because it's made up of us. That's a profound way of looking at it. How do you explain the existence of evil in this context? If we all come from one entity, the best analogy that I've heard for why people do what they do comes from Eckhart Tolle. He was asked, why is there evil in the world if we all come from a place of love? And he explained it this way: imagine that the sun is God or the universal collective, that oneness, that love that we're all coming from. Interesting analogy. How does it work? The sun makes sure that everything on planet Earth continues to live by sending it energy. So that energy comes to the Earth, and it's turned into living things, and it keeps living things alive. However, when that energy enters another being, what that being chooses to do with that energy, you can't blame the sun for it. So we're responsible for our own actions? Exactly. If the sun is what makes me alive, but yet I do something negative with the energy I was given, it's not the sun's fault, it's my fault. I decided to do that with the energy. Because like I explained, we are all creators, we are all part of the creation of this universe, we are all one with God, we are all one with the collective. So we have free will in how we use this energy? Yes. We're individuals in the sense that we accept this energy, it creates who we are and what we are, but then what we do with it is entirely up to us. That brings up an interesting question. If we have this choice, why do some people seem to have much more difficult lives than others? If it is true that we get to choose the type of life that we're going to live, why would someone take one that's so challenging versus someone that would take one that's very easy? The difference is, the person who takes the difficult one can become enlightened. The one who takes the easy one cannot and will not in that lifetime. Are you saying that hardship is necessary for spiritual growth? It takes the trauma, it takes the negative things to happen to a person in order for them to be able to rise above them. My best days were my worst days. Those were the days that I shined, those were the days that I showed my character, those were the days that I proved that I can be a better person. Those are the days that we can really measure a person by. That's a powerful perspective. How has this understanding shaped your life? Now, if everything came easy to me and everything was simplified and easy, I wouldn't be here with you today. You would have no interest in speaking with me. It's because of the transformation that I made, and others wish to make that transformation. So you believe that our challenges are opportunities for growth? Absolutely. Many people have experienced trauma, many have experienced these horrific things. Mind you, it's not always that you do the horrific things, they could be done to you. Either way, you are involved in this traumatic experience, and we need to rise above that. The way to do it is to experience it, become stronger, and move one step closer to enlightenment. Can you give us an example of how this principle has played out in history or spirituality? Let's look at the Buddha. He was a prince, he could have anything he wanted delivered right to him. His father, who was the king, said, "Never leave the compound, never go beyond the walls, because outside there it is terrible." And the Buddha said, "Well, if I don't get out there, I will never be enlightened, because you can't be enlightened if you only live half of a life, especially if it's the easy half." So what did the Buddha do? He went beyond the walls. He left his parents, his wife, and child even, to try to alleviate suffering for all people. And the way he needed to do it, the way he knew he had to do it, was to suffer. So he left with no money, no clothes, no food, no water, nothing, and no one knew who he was because no one had ever seen his face. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. No one knew he was a prince, so he was a homeless man for many years and endured that type of suffering and eventually became enlightened. I do not believe that ever would have happened had he stayed in his father's compound, and he also wouldn't have been able to teach people what he taught us. That's a powerful example. Now, shifting gears a bit, what do you believe happens to people after they die, especially those who have done terrible things in their lives? The way I understand it is, even the worst of the worst people, when they return, they are shown their lives, and they are shown what they did right and wrong. I do not think there is a good place and a bad place. I don't think there's a heaven and hell. So what do you think happens instead? I think that when you cross over, you see the things that you have done wrong, and you become all-knowing, and you understand why you did those things. That's quite different from traditional religious views of the afterlife. How has this understanding affected your life? It's made me more compassionate towards others, even those who do terrible things. I understand that we're all part of this collective consciousness, all learning and growing. It's also made me more mindful of my own actions and their consequences. Has your NDE changed how you view death? Absolutely. I no longer fear death, but I've learned to respect life more. I understand now that our time here is precious and that every experience, good or bad, is an opportunity for growth. I'm sure many of our listeners will find your story both compelling and thought-provoking. Now, I'd like to delve a bit deeper into some of the ideas you've shared. Sure. You mentioned that your near-death experience changed you from an atheist to a believer. Can you elaborate on how your concept of spirituality evolved? Certainly. Before my NDE, I was a firm atheist. I believed that when we die, that's it, lights out, game over. But after experiencing what I did, I couldn't deny that there was something more. However, it wasn't a simple switch to traditional religious beliefs. My experience showed me a reality that didn't fit neatly into any one religion's teachings. So how would you describe your current spiritual beliefs? I've come to see spirituality as something much broader and more inclusive than any single religious doctrine. It's not about adhering to a specific set of rules or worshiping a particular deity. Instead, it's about recognizing our connection to something greater than ourselves, this collective consciousness or universal energy that I mentioned earlier. That's quite a shift. How has this new perspective affected your daily life? It's changed everything. I now see every interaction, every decision, as part of a larger tapestry. I'm more mindful of my actions and their potential ripple effects. I try to approach life with more compassion and understanding, recognizing that we're all part of this same cosmic dance. You've mentioned this idea of a collective consciousness several times. Can you explain a bit more about what you mean by that? Think of it like this: imagine consciousness as an ocean, and each of us as individual waves in that ocean. We appear separate on the surface, but beneath, we're all part of the same body of water. This collective consciousness is like that ocean. It's the underlying reality that connects all of us. That's an interesting perspective. How does this idea of collective consciousness relate to traditional concepts of God? In my view, what many people call God is really this collective consciousness. It's not a separate, all-powerful being sitting on a cloud, judging us. It's an energy, a consciousness that we're all part of. When people pray or meditate, they're really tapping into this collective consciousness. So in your view, we're all part of this God? Exactly. That's why I mentioned earlier that Jesus said, God is within you, and you are a part of God. I believe he understood this concept of collective consciousness. We're not separate from the divine, we're an integral part of it. That's quite different from how most religions view God. How do you reconcile this with other religious teachings? I believe that many religious teachings are trying to express this same truth, but they're limited by language and cultural context. When you strip away the specific rituals and dogmas, many religions are pointing to the same underlying reality, our connection to something greater than ourselves. You mentioned earlier that you don't believe in heaven and hell in the traditional sense. Can you expand on that? Based on my experience and understanding, I don't believe there's a place of eternal reward or punishment after death. Instead, I think we experience a kind of, let's call it a life review. We see the impacts of our actions, both positive and negative, and understand them fully. So what happens after this life review? I believe we continue to exist as part of this collective consciousness. We might choose to reincarnate to learn more lessons, or we might stay in this state of expanded awareness for a while. But I don't think it's a final, unchanging state. That's fascinating. Now, you've talked about how your NDE changed your spiritual beliefs, but how did it affect your everyday life? Well, as I mentioned earlier, at first it led me to be reckless. I lost my fear of death, which isn't always a good thing when you're young and impulsive. But over time, it's led me to live more mindfully. Can you give an example of what you mean by living more mindfully? Sure. I try to be more present in each moment, really experiencing life rather than just going through the motions. I'm more aware of how my actions affect others, knowing that we're all connected. And I try to approach challenges as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to avoid. That sounds like a positive change. But it must have been challenging to integrate these new perspectives into your life. How did you manage that? It was definitely a process. At first, I struggled to reconcile my experience with the normal world. I felt like I had this profound knowledge that others couldn't understand. It took time to learn how to live with this new awareness without feeling alienated from others. How did you overcome that feeling of alienation? I started seeking out others who had similar experiences. I read a lot about NDEs and spiritual experiences. And I learned to express my ideas in ways that others could relate to, even if they hadn't had the same experiences. You mentioned earlier that you've had other experiences of guidance since your NDE, like in the bar shootout and when you were drowning. How often do these experiences occur? They happen more often than you might think. It's not always dramatic like those examples, though. Sometimes it's just a strong intuition about which way to turn while driving, or a sudden urge to call someone who, it turns out, really needed to talk. Do you feel like you're constantly being watched over or guided? It's not so much being watched over as it is being connected. I feel like I'm tapped into this larger consciousness, and sometimes information or guidance comes through when it's needed. But it's not controlling my life or making decisions for me. That's an important distinction. Now, you've talked about how this experience has affected you personally, but how has it influenced your relationships with others? It's made me much more empathetic. When you realize we're all part of the same consciousness, it's easier to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I find I'm more patient with people, more understanding of their struggles. Even with people who do harmful things? That's a great question. It's definitely more challenging with people who cause harm, but I try to remember that they're also part of this collective consciousness. Their harmful actions often come from their own pain or misunderstanding. That doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps me approach them with compassion rather than hatred. That's a very enlightened view. Has this perspective helped you in your personal relationships? Absolutely. Remember, I mentioned that my relationship with my father was strained before my NDE. Seeing him grieving over my body was a turning point. It helped me understand that despite our conflicts, there was love there. Did your relationship with your father improve after that? It did, gradually. I approached him with more understanding, and I think he sensed the change in me. We were able to build a much better relationship over time. It wasn't perfect, but it was a significant improvement. That's wonderful. Now, you've mentioned that you see challenges as opportunities for growth. Can you give an example of how you've applied this in your life? Sure. After my NDE, I went through a period of recklessness that led me into some dangerous situations. At the time, it felt like I was wasting the second chance I'd been given. But looking back, I see how those experiences taught me valuable lessons about the preciousness of life and the importance of using my time wisely. How did you turn that around? It was a gradual process. I started to realize that just because I wasn't afraid of death didn't mean I should court it. I began to see my life as a gift, an opportunity to learn and grow and potentially help others. That's when I started sharing my story and the insights I'd gained. That's a powerful transformation. Now, I'm curious about your views on science and spirituality. Many people see them as conflicting. How do you reconcile your spiritual experiences with scientific understanding? I don't see science and spirituality as conflicting at all. In fact, I think they're two different approaches to understanding the same reality. Science is about understanding the physical mechanisms of our world, while spirituality is about understanding the consciousness behind it. Can you give an example of how you see them working together? Certainly. Take quantum physics, for instance. It's showing us that at the most fundamental level, everything is interconnected and that consciousness plays a role in shaping reality. That aligns perfectly with the spiritual concept of collective consciousness that I experienced. That's an interesting connection. Do you think science will ever be able to fully explain near-death experiences? I think science will continue to give us more insights into what's happening in the brain during NDEs. But I also believe there are aspects of the experience that go beyond our current scientific understanding. I'm excited to see how our knowledge evolves. Speaking of evolution, how has your understanding of your NDE changed over time? That's a great question. Initially, I was overwhelmed by the experience and struggled to make sense of it. Over time, as I've reflected on it and learned about others' experiences, my understanding has deepened. I've come to see it less as a single event and more as a gateway to a new way of perceiving reality. Has your interpretation of what you experienced changed? In some ways, yes. At first, I interpreted everything very literally. Now, I see some aspects as symbolic representations of deeper truths. For example, the being of light I encountered, I now see that as a representation of this collective consciousness rather than a specific entity. That's an interesting evolution. Now, you've talked about how this experience has affected your spiritual beliefs and personal life. Has it influenced your views on society and how we should live together? Absolutely. When you realize we're all interconnected, it changes how you view social issues. I believe many of our societal problems stem from a sense of separation, seeing others as fundamentally different from ourselves. If we could all recognize our underlying unity, I think we'd naturally create a more compassionate and just society. That's a beautiful idea, but how do you think we can achieve that in practice? It starts with individual awareness. As more people awaken to this understanding of our interconnectedness, whether through NDEs, meditation, psychedelic experiences, or just deep reflection, it ripples out into society. We can also foster this awareness through education, promoting empathy and teaching about our fundamental interconnectedness from a young age. You mentioned psychedelic experiences. Do you see a connection between those and NDEs? There are certainly similarities in the reports from both types of experiences. Many people who have had psychedelic experiences describe a sense of unity and interconnectedness that's very similar to what I experienced in my NDE. I think both can be gateways to experiencing this collective consciousness directly. That's interesting. Now, you've shared how your NDE has positively impacted your life, but have there been any downsides or challenges? Definitely. As I mentioned, initially it led to some reckless behavior because I lost my fear of death. There's also been the challenge of integrating these experiences and insights into everyday life. Sometimes it can feel isolating when you're seeing the world so differently from those around you. How have you dealt with those challenges? It's been a process of finding balance. I've had to learn how to honor the profound insights from my NDE while also staying grounded in day-to-day reality. Connecting with others who've had similar experiences has been incredibly helpful. And I've found practices like meditation help me maintain that sense of connection without losing touch with the physical world. That makes sense. Now, we've talked a lot about your personal experience and insights. How do you think these ideas could be applied on a larger scale to address some of the challenges we face as a society? I believe many of our global challenges, things like climate change, inequality, conflict, stem from a lack of recognition of our interconnectedness. If we truly understood that harming others or the planet is ultimately harming ourselves, we'd make very different choices. Can you give a specific example? Take climate change. If we truly felt our connection to the Earth and to future generations, we wouldn't be so quick to prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. We'd naturally make choices that benefit the whole rather than just ourselves individually. That's a powerful perspective. Do you think it's possible for people to gain this understanding without having an NDE or similar experience? Absolutely. While NDEs can be a dramatic wake-up call, there are many paths to this awareness. Meditation, spending time in nature, engaging in acts of service, all of these can help us experience our interconnectedness. It's about cultivating mindfulness and empathy in our daily lives. You've mentioned meditation a few times. Is that a regular practice for you? Yes, it's become an essential part of my life. Meditation helps me maintain that sense of connection I experienced during my NDE. It's a way of quieting the noise of everyday life and tapping into that deeper awareness. How would you describe the benefits you've experienced from meditation? It's helped me stay more centered and calm, even in challenging situations. It's also enhanced my intuition and that sense of guidance I mentioned earlier. And it's a constant reminder of our interconnectedness, which influences how I interact with others and the world around me. That's fascinating. You mentioned that you no longer fear death but respect life more. Can you elaborate on that? Of course. After my NDE, I realized that death isn't the end, but rather a transition. However, this life we're living now is incredibly important. It's our opportunity to learn, grow, and contribute to the collective consciousness. How has this affected your day-to-day life? I try to approach each day with more mindfulness and purpose. I'm more aware of how my actions affect others and how they contribute to my own spiritual growth. I also try to help others understand these concepts and find meaning in their own struggles. You've mentioned the collective consciousness several times. How do you think this relates to individual identity? That's a great question. I believe we maintain our individual identities, but we're also part of something much larger. It's like we're individual waves in a vast ocean. We have our own form and movement, but we're also inseparable from the whole. That's a beautiful analogy. Now, you've had some pretty intense experiences since your NDE. Do you still feel the presence of that guiding being in your everyday life? Yes, I do. It's not always as dramatic as the incidents I mentioned earlier, but I often feel a sense of guidance or intuition that I believe comes from that same source. It's like having a constant, subtle connection to something greater than myself. How do you distinguish between this guidance and your own thoughts? It's not always easy, and it took some practice. But generally, the guidance feels different from my regular thoughts. It's calmer, clearer, and often comes with a sense of certainty that I can't explain rationally. That's intriguing. Now, you mentioned earlier that your understanding of all this became clearer when you met your second wife. Can you tell us about that? Absolutely. My second wife has been on a similar spiritual journey, and she's helped me articulate and understand my experiences better. She's also introduced me to various spiritual and philosophical concepts that have given me a framework to better understand what I experienced. That must have been a profound connection for you both. It truly was. It felt like meeting someone who spoke the same language as me, spiritually speaking. She helped me see that my experiences weren't isolated incidents, but part of a larger spiritual reality that many people have encountered in different ways. You've mentioned that you see God or the divine differently now. How has this affected your relationship with organized religion? It's complicated. I have great respect for many religious teachings and the comfort they bring to people. But I no longer feel the need to adhere to any one religious doctrine. I see truth in many different spiritual traditions, and I try to learn from all of them. So you take more of a universalist approach to spirituality now? Yes, exactly. I believe that many paths can lead to the same truth. The specifics of the journey might differ, but the destination, connection with the divine or the collective consciousness, is the same. That's a very inclusive view. Now, you've talked about how hardship can lead to spiritual growth. How do you reconcile this with the immense suffering that some people experience in the world? That's a challenging question, and one I've struggled with a lot. I don't believe that suffering is good in itself, or that we should seek it out. But I do believe that when we encounter suffering, which is inevitable in life, we have the opportunity to grow from it. But what about extreme cases of suffering, like children in war-torn countries or victims of terrible crimes? Those situations are heartbreaking, and I don't claim to have all the answers. What I believe is that on a cosmic scale, even these terrible experiences contribute to the growth and evolution of the collective consciousness. But that doesn't mean we should accept them passively. Part of our spiritual growth involves working to alleviate suffering wherever we can. That's a profound perspective. Now, you've mentioned that you believe we choose our lives before we're born. Can you explain that further? Based on my experiences and what I've learned since, I believe that before we incarnate into this life, our souls choose the circumstances and challenges we'll face. We do this to learn specific lessons and to contribute to the collective in specific ways. That's a heavy responsibility. Do you think we're aware of these choices once we're born? Not consciously, no. I think that's part of the challenge, to rediscover our purpose and learn our lessons without the benefit of knowing why we chose this particular life. But I believe we have intuitions and inclinations that can guide us if we learn to listen to them. That's fascinating. Now, you've had some pretty intense experiences since your NDE. Has it all been positive, or have there been challenges as well? Oh, there have definitely been challenges. As I mentioned earlier, for a while after my NDE, I became reckless because I no longer feared death. It took time for me to understand that respecting life is just as important as not fearing death. How did you come to that understanding? It was a gradual process. I had to face the consequences of my reckless behavior and realize that I was wasting the second chance I'd been given. I also started to understand that my actions affected not just me, but everyone around me and, in a sense, the entire collective consciousness. That's a powerful realization. How has it changed your approach to life? I try to live more consciously now. I'm more aware of the potential impact of my actions, both positive and negative. I also try to help others understand these concepts, which is why I'm sharing my story. Speaking of sharing your story, have you encountered skepticism when talking about your experiences? Absolutely. Many people find it hard to believe, especially if they haven't had similar experiences themselves. And I understand that. Before my NDE, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. How do you handle that skepticism? I don't try to convince anyone. I just share my experiences and the understanding I've gained from them. If it resonates with someone, great. If not, that's okay too. Everyone has their own journey and their own way of understanding the world. That's a very open-minded approach. Now, you've talked about how we're all part of this collective consciousness. How does that affect your view of human relationships? It's made me see every interaction as an opportunity for growth and learning. Even difficult relationships or conflicts can be seen as chances to understand ourselves and others better. It's also made me more compassionate. When you see everyone as part of the same whole, it's easier to empathize with them, even if you disagree with their actions. That's beautiful. Now, as we start to wrap up, I'm curious, what do you think is the most important lesson you've learned from your NDE and subsequent experiences? I think the most important lesson is that love is the fundamental force of the universe. Not romantic love, necessarily, but a deeper, all-encompassing love that connects everything. When we act from that love, we're in harmony with the universe and with our true selves. That's profound. Do you have any final thoughts or messages for our audience? I would encourage everyone to take time to explore their own consciousness, to be open to the mysteries of life. Whether you've had an NDE or not, there are always opportunities to connect with something greater than yourself. Pay attention to your intuitions, be kind to yourself and others, and remember that every experience, good or bad, is an opportunity for growth. You might be surprised at what you discover about yourself and your connection to everything around you. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey with us. Your story and insights are truly inspiring. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to share my experiences, and I hope they can bring some understanding or comfort to others on their own spiritual journeys. From an atheist to a believer in a greater spiritual reality, his story reminds us that there's always more to learn about ourselves and the universe we inhabit. Thank you for joining us, and we hope this conversation has given you something to think about on your own journey of discovery. Join us next time for more explorations into the mysteries of consciousness, near-death experiences, and human experience. Until then, take care and stay curious.